Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome John Klyczek. He has an MA in English and has taught college rhetoric and research argumentation for over 8 years. His literary scholarship concentrates on the history of global eugenics and Aldous Huxley's dystopic novel, Brave New World. He is the author of School World Order, The Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education, and he is a contributor to the Center for Research on Globalization, Op-Ed News, The Intrepid Report, The Dissident Voice, Blacklisted News, The Activist Post, Counter Markets, News with Views, The Saker, Rinse News, David Icke News, Natural News, and the SGT Report. He is also the director of writing and editing at Black Freighter Productions Books. John, welcome. How are you tonight?
Very good. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for joining us. I've really been looking forward to this. What we're going to talk about now is extremely important for people to know about. And it's all about the future of where our education system is going and how it's connected to a bunch of other things that are coming down the pipeline that are extremely disturbing. But when it comes to our education system, you know, from indoctrination and mind control to teaching false history and just turning out good slaves, our modern education system, it perpetuates so much of what's wrong about our society, I believe. And now it appears to be headed even in an even more sinister direction, which we're about to get into. But first, John, it's your first time on the show. Tell us a little bit more about your background and what opened your eyes to what's going on behind the scenes right now.
Okay, so been teaching for about 8 years, and you know, I've written about some other topics in the past, but I kind of didn't plan to write about education. You know, didn't want to like poo-poo where I work. You know, try to keep a buffer for employment and things like that, and then. Round about, well, maybe 3 years ago. It's been a while now, but several years ago, the governor of Illinois, Bruce Rauner, was kind of stalling on our budget, and you know, I saw it as a ploy to privatize a lot of public services, including public education. And when he did it, I saw a bunch of buzzwords that popped out that I had read in The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America by Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt. Some of these terms were school choice, which is a buzzword for privatization involving charter schools, tax credits and vouchers that take public tax dollars and pay for private schools and other public-private partnerships that facilitate learning. And then there was other ones like cradle to career was another term that Rauner tossed out. This is a term for workforce training, turning academics into workforce training. I had been at some conferences where they were talking about P20 councils, and these are the public-private partnerships that were going to merge school with healthcare and criminal justice, and all this stuff was happening at the same time that one of my departments got shut down. So I wrote a little article about how I saw the Hegelian dialectic at work in that situation. And Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt reached out to me. She read the article on News with Views, and then we've become really good friends ever since. She wrote the foreword to my book, helped me with the research, and yeah, that's kind of how I got started. I took off from there.
Very good. Now, speaking of your book, it's got such important information. I think I really recommend everybody pick up a copy. But tell us just a little bit more about it, and you know what's it all about? The School World Order.
Okay, so you could break the book down into two components. Basically, the first I just kind of summarized, which is the corporatization or privatization of public education. And then the second part has to do with technology and how technology will facilitate that. And there are about three main technologies that the book covers. One is adaptive learning software, which I can break down in more detail later. Socio-emotional learning, break that down a little bit more later. And then precision education, basically data mining, cognitive, behavioral, emotional, and then DNA, IQ, DNA, all to be aggregated into a social credit system through the public-private partnerships, through the merger of healthcare, education, and criminal justice. So that's basically a summary or a thesis of the book. The background to it, there's another angle to it, which is the Order of Skull and Bones. And the Order of Skull and Bones was very influential in the history of American education. Charlotte actually, I'm learning this as I write the book. I didn't actually know this when I wrote the first article. I kind of learned it as I went. I had found Sutton's book in a used bookstore, and I said, "Man, I've always heard about this guy. Let me finally read this." And I had noticed that the first chapter was how the order controls education. And as I'm reading that, I learned that Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt is the one that leaked to him the black address books from the order. So Charlotte's father and grandfather were in the Order of Skull and Bones, and they get these address books. And the thing you should know about the address books is it doesn't just tell you where the people live, but it also tells you, like, what do they specialize in? So are they lawyers? Are they in advertising? Are they in education? Once upon a time, was a lot of people in theology. Are they in medicine? And so there are also a lot of old money families, and basically they use these address books to kind of consolidate their wealth and keep them in these old money families. And so Charlotte leaked that to this guy, Anthony Sutton, who wrote the America's Secret Establishment, Introduction to the Order of Skull and Bones. Sutton was he was a professor, he was a research fellow at the Hoover Institute and Stanford Research Institute, and it's not Stanford Research Institute, it's just Stanford University. That's what I stumbled there. He had written a series called Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development. And he was, found that basically we fund revolution all the way through the Cold War, and basically found that they wouldn't even have been the adversaries, as formidable as they were, had we not helped them with infrastructure, railroads, other things. And some of those, it didn't make sense to him at the time, but when Charlotte gave him the address books, he noticed that a common thread there were people from the Order of Skull and Bones, people that ran banks like Guaranteed Trust, Ruskin Bank, and other banks as well, Union Banking Corporation. They also funded the Nazis. And so some people are probably familiar with that history of it, but he told Charlotte that the most important part of the book was how the order controls education, and so that's the other part of it. That's that kind of goes in with the thesis and the summary.
I think that's a good place to start. Let's start at the beginning of our education system and how it was formed to basically turn out good slaves, and how was the Skull and Bones involved?
Okay, so there's about three main ways that the order is important in the history of American education. So first is they basically set up the American university system as we know it. They also set up compulsory education, so basically compulsory public education. They also set up educational psychology as the basic methodology for institutionalized compulsory learning. Okay, and then now they're also actually advancing that further with artificial intelligence and something that they call transhumanism. Okay, so the American university system, how was that set up by the Order of Skull and Bones? There's three people that are important. They're known as the Troika. Okay, so that's Daniel Quake Gilman, Andrew Dixon White, and Timothy Dwight. They were integral in setting up Johns Hopkins University, Cornell University, and University of California, Berkeley. Compulsory education was basically set up by Alphonso Taft at Antioch College. He basically put Horace Mann into place. Alphonso Taft, I should mention, is founder of the Order of Skull and Bones with William Huntington Russell, who was basically an opium dealer, or his brother was an opium dealer. I'm sorry, he was a military man. I flub that. And so they also set up Hegelian philosophy as well as one of the main components that would back up the educational psychology. So the educational psychology is what we call basically the stimulus response method. It's basically Pavlov's dog stuff. Okay, so the stimulus is the food, and Pavlov's response is to salivate. If you want to condition the dog to do something, you can associate an unnatural stimuli with the natural stimuli. So if you want them to salivate with the bell, you can ring the bell with the food. Later you can remove the food, and the dog will elicit the same response. You know, the basis of all behavioral psychology is that principle. They basically just kind of refined how they issue punishments and rewards and how they schedule it. So later they came up with behaviorism, and then they came up with operant conditioning. But it's all basically the stimulus response stuff. So the order was important in setting that up. Starts with Wilhelm Wundt, who was basically the father of laboratory psychology. Now, he wasn't in the order, but basically everybody that Daniel Coit Gilman put into place, such as G. Stanley Hall to be the first professor of what would later be psychology, but basically the chair of philosophy. Laboratory psychology comes out of the history of philosophy. He picked G. Stanley Hall because he was a PhD of Wundt. And then later under him is John Dewey. So John Dewey is one of the most important people in education. Anybody that's a teacher is going to know the name John Dewey. It's your Dewey Decimal System. He was big at Columbia University and also the University of Chicago. And he was a Hegelian, and he also was, he was under G. Stanley Hall. Okay, and then underneath John Dewey is John B. Watson, who's one of the most important behavioral scientists. He did the little Albert experiment, where he basically wanted to condition this little boy to be scared of anything eventually anything that was white and furry. First it was a rabbit, and he made loud noises. He would bang loud noises and things like that. He conditioned this child to be scared of these rabbits by doing that. Okay, and then you pass that down to somebody called B.F. Skinner. Okay, so you go from John B. Watson down to E.L. Thorndike, and then from E.L. Thorndike and some other people, you get to B.F. Skinner in the whole chain in the history. B.F. Skinner, this is basically why the Principal Skinner is in The Simpsons. That's what they're referencing. B.F. Skinner was a behavioral psychologist at Harvard. And he was funded by McGeorge Bundy, who was Order of Skull and Bones. And McGeorge Bundy, when he was dean at Harvard, basically paid out the money to fund his programmed instruction, which was his teaching machine, and it took the stimulus response method of classical conditioning and put it into an analog, not a computer, but a machine. It didn't have digital windows back then. So if you've ever seen those Viewmasters, you remember the Viewmasters back in the day, the Disney thing, it's got the little wheel in it, right? And then you push this button and the wheel turns, you see a different picture. So take that principle, put questions and answers on a reel of tape, and then you turn it one way. It goes one way, not the other. So that's the stimulus. The questions and answer, multiple choice, short answer, whatever, those are the stimulus. The response is what you write down, what you put in. As you gear it forward, if you get good enough answers, it'll push you on to the next level. Or it might, if you do not so well, it might remediate you and make you have to redo it. He actually also hooked some of them up so that they would distribute chocolate if you got a right answer. So he incorporated the reward system into it as well. So today we got this stuff called adaptive learning software, which I mentioned earlier when I did my little summary. The adaptive learning software is basically the same thing, just change the tape and the gears to digital windows and clicking. Okay, and they got some interactive media. I guess you got audio and video and stuff. So I guess there's some of that extra to it, but that's the same principle. The algorithms are a little bit more sophisticated. They say that they can personalize learning a little more precisely, I guess. But largely, what those are geared towards is this stuff called career pathways. All right, so if anybody wants to look at the adaptive learning software, it's stuff called like Brightspace Leap, Dreambox, Smart Sparrow, Clever, Newton. These are all different adaptive learning softwares. If you just go on those websites, any of those software websites, and just do a search in their windows, most of them are going to have stuff for career pathways in there. And career pathways is workforce training, which gets back to what I had said about with Charlotte. Charlotte actually wrote when she wrote The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, it was shortly after She worked at the Department of Education as a special advisor in the Office of Research in Education or Research and Improvement. And she stumbled across something called Project BEST, Better Education Skills Through Technology. It's everything I just mentioned. It's all it's privatizing education with technology corporations that transfer human teachers into these Skinner box adaptive learning computers. And an interesting history that goes all the way with that is that is basically that the Secretary of Education at the time was Bill Bennett. And Bill Bennett, well, it was T.H. Bell for a year, and then it was Bill Bennett. Okay, so but Bill Bennett was still there when they had Project BEST. And he set up K-12 Inc. That's one of the biggest online education companies, one of the biggest virtual schools out there. The current Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, also funded it. Peter Thiel, who's Bilderberg Group, and also funds either Clever or Newton. Those are the adaptive learning softwares, or both. He was Bill Bennett's speechwriter when he was Secretary of Education. And Betsy DeVos is in tight with the American Legislative Exchange Council, which basically is this corporatist lobbying group that writes boilerplate legislation that they give out to Congress at various states and the federal level to set up these bills for to authorize virtual schools like K-12 Inc. And she even has press releases as secretary where she continues to work for them as well. So basically what you're seeing right now is while we're locked down and forced to use this stuff, Project BEST is making its fruition. Okay, and Stephen Mnuchin with Skull and Bones is helping that out, and has helped it out with this thing called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or the Tax Cuts and Robots Act, as some people refer to it. And it's the Tax Cuts Act that came in a couple of years ago. He was influential in writing it or developing it. And there's a clause in there called the Full and Immediate Expensing Clause, which basically says that if a company can write off depreciation on equipment, as it depreciates over time, year or two, whatever, instead of that, you can write it off at the end of the first year. So if you buy a bunch of automated adaptive learning software, you can pay off the depreciation or basically get it for free that year. And so he's helping to accelerate all of that stuff. And so those are the main ways that the Order of Skull and Bones has been influential in education, basically for well over 100 years. I should also mention that Daniel Coit Gilman sat on the General Education Board, which was Rockefeller's first philanthropy. Okay, and it basically set up a bunch of workforce schooling stuff. There's a famous quote by Frederick T. Gates, who was basically the mouthpiece for that philanthropy, that basically says I'm paraphrasing, we're not going to teach people to be lawyers and philosophers and things like that. We have enough of those. He says we want to perfect what they are doing now in their simple ways. And what that meant was then we want to perfect their labor output. Right? And at the time, this was the conversion to the industrial economy, which they were like, yeah, it's going to be utopia, right? People like Bertrand Russell were like, yeah, don't worry, you only work 4 hours a day because we're going to mechanize all the old slave labor and stuff. And it's basically what they say now with all this automated stuff. So I don't know if I would be, I don't know if you want to buy that too much, but yeah. So that's the Order of Skull and Bones. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that. Now, we move forward to what's happening today with everything with this coronavirus. It's been so convenient to get so many agendas pushed through that they've been aching to get done. This coronavirus has also been extremely convenient for this Project BEST. Now, let's talk about some of the things that are happening behind this whole COVID-19 situation with where the education system is going now, ever since this whole thing started.
Okay. So one of the first major ways I could say is there's new federal regulations on what they call distance learning, so online learning. So the first thing is, right, I've never taught an online class in my life, but I'm teaching them now, and that's because everybody has to, right? And so now, well, technically, you're supposed to have like certificates to do that, which is part of the reason why I never did. I mean, I like to teach it in front of people like you and me, but if I had wanted to, there was like a whole series of courses and training that you have to get. So they said, well, you know, if we're going to let everybody that doesn't have certs, you know, if we're going to convert everything to online, we're going to have to provide some loopholes, or we have to relax those rules. We have to basically deregulate. Okay, but what they decided to do was kind of expand it, not just to enable, you know, people who don't have certs to teach online. They also want to loosen up the rules for the adaptive learning software. So if you go to the new federal rules, it's 85 FR 18638. You can see the term competency-based education is used over 100 times in there. And in the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, which is the main federal bill that oversees all national education, it's the main federal overlaw or whatever, the oversight, okay? And then there's adaptive learning is mentioned about 10 or 15 times, okay? And it's referred to as artificial intelligence, okay? So what's competency-based education? Basically, it means instead of working towards, you know, academic mastery, you would work towards competence, all right? And that basically is going to mean workforce competence, right? So you just need to learn just enough to be able to perform, you know, whatever is the job you need to do. You know, push your button, pull your lever, okay. You know, maybe, you know, do some IT, some minimal IT work, something like that. But it also means that it'll be on a subscription basis. So competency based also means at your own pace, right? So instead of and they put this out there like this is, you know, this is a good thing because, all right, so imagine you're a student and you know, teacher moves too fast or too slow, right? You got, you know, teachers got to largely kind of, you know, move the group or the curriculum, however they want to, or, you know, balance the two. You know, and there might be somebody that's just ready to zoom ahead. There might be people that are, you know, still struggling with the early concepts. So they say, well, with competency-based, right, we're going to let you take your time. So instead of having to complete your semester in 16 weeks or whatever it is, you know, you're going to be on a subscription basis. And the subscription means basically you're going to pay a monthly fee to the adaptive learning software through maybe K-12 Inc. or KIP or Connections Academy, which is a Pearson company. And you're basically, you just keep paying that monthly fee until you know, maybe you move really fast through it, or maybe you pay for it for 2 years. Okay, and so so they're loosening the rules for that, and you can see it already now in the sense that a lot of schools, like a lot of schools where I teach, they want to do asynchronous. Well, if you're doing asynchronous, that means, right, the students can log in whenever they want, morning, day. You know, there's no synchronous video like we're doing right now. This is synchronous. So like maybe I had a bunch of students in little windows, right? We're all here together. I'm doing my little lecture. They can raise their virtual hands with their button or whatever. Asynchronous, then, right? I mean, you can move ahead in the curriculum. So even though they might not, for teachers out there or people that are in school, they might not call it competency-based education. That's what it is. And if you look at the bill, that's what they want to do with it. Why? Because they want to facilitate the adaptive learning. So the other thing that in that bill mentions is the artificial intelligence part, which is basically, you know, adaptive learning is what they call dumb AI. Okay, which it means it does, you know, it can do pretty sophisticated stuff, okay, or complex stuff, but it can only do that. Okay, it's not what they call artificial general intelligence, meaning it's not conscious. It can't make its own decisions. It can't decide, you know, it wants to go somewhere else and not do your adaptive learning for the day or whatever. So what they want to do, though, is, right, these things are constantly improving, and they want to move towards that AGI. And so they basically, to paraphrase, says that we can't regulate as fast as the software evolves, and we don't want to slow down progress. So we're not going to penalize anybody that hasn't gotten prior approval from us, the Department of Education, if you want to move forward with a new algorithm, a new software. And I should mention that IBM's, there's a person from IBM that sat on the committee that deregulated the rules, and IBM has the Watson, which is artificial intelligence, that partners with Pearson Education to do basically AI, tutoring. Okay, and Watson does everything, by the way, just to see how it can aggregate all this data together. It does everything from education. It can do your taxes. It does security analysis. It can do all kinds of stuff. So, machine learning largely works by taking data and then just recrunching those algorithms. So that's why that's all called Watson, because ultimately it all is part of the same big brain that they're feeding. There's a couple other ways that those deregulations are getting accelerated, which is through the CARES money. Okay, so when they give you the CARES money, that's basically the stimulus money. Most of it is going to be for to facilitate your online training for your teachers, or to facilitate the infrastructure if you don't have it, maybe to give out microloans to families and students so that they have some devices so that they can actually receive the online education. And then the other part is that they have, that's just in the main package. There's some other competitions that Betsy DeVos has, and one is called Rethinking K-12 Models, which is all about the different tech upgrades. And then she's got one called Reimagining Workforce Preparation, which is all about career pathways. If you go and you look at the applications at the Department of Education, you can see that they use the term career pathways over and over again. So if you tie in that grant with the deregulation of adaptive learning, it's both the things I talked about in the book, which is everything that Charlotte mentioned. And I guess I should mention as well that the Reimagining Workforce Preparation is named the same thing as the Build Back Better education initiative in New York under Governor Cuomo, partnering with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So you want to build back better. So a good example of when they built back better would be in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. And Louisiana is basically 90% charter schools, and that's when it happened. They said, hey, why don't we just go ahead and, instead of those old public schools, put some of these charter schools, these public, private, corporate charter schools in. And I've got 66 grants, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grants on my website, schoolworldorder.info. It's in the resources section, and they're linked so you can look at them. And he's funded millions and millions of dollars for decades of school choice, career pathways, cradle to career, adaptive learning, P20 councils, all of it, right? He's not exactly the most loved man in the world right now, but that's one more thing you can add to the list if he's somebody you're concerned about. So that's how all that works. That's how all that works together as far as the what's going on right now. Yeah.
Now I know that there's a lot in the pipeline that a lot of researchers believe is going to be coming, such as a social credit system, just like China, that we're going to see this whole vaccination thing tie into this somehow, where we have, limited travel and limitations on everything we can do, basically, if we don't get this supposed upcoming vaccination. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do see contact tracing, and I'm hoping that, mandatory vaccination violates the Nuremberg Code. All right, so I'm hoping we're not going to violate the Nuremberg Code. We could talk more about vaccines and saying, but I know my brain. I didn't get a full load of classes this this semester because of this. Not enrollment was low, so I'm doing tree service today. So I feel it's like I had some sun. I am notorious for forgetting what I'm saying sometimes, so I don't want to get too sidetracked on the vaccine thing. But I can say some things about it. But the contact tracing. Let's just start there. Hopefully, it doesn't go any further than that. The contact tracing I see is the beginning of social credit. Okay, because and it ties in with the education stuff that I talked about. So as I mentioned, I said that the public-private partnerships through things called P20 councils and other public-private workforce development, criminal justice, and mental health or healthcare partnerships. Okay, like communitarian stuff, basically. They're going to aggregate all that data together, and so what that means is, I mean, when I wrote the book, I'm like, this is going to be a hard one to explain because people are going to say, how are they can't take FERPA records and mix them with HIPAA records. Well, guess what? If they got contact tracing, they will, because schools are already talking about how can they help with contact tracing. So now you got people that are supposed to be in charge of FERPA records talking about your health records, okay? And then, now we've got freaking, the whole world, rioting, and so now they've got, people said, hey, we're going to have a medical martial law. Well, now, they pretty much, they've got us, almost there, just for, police purposes. Okay. So, and I actually that's on my Twitter. They're in Minnesota. They're using the contact tracing apps to trace the violent protesters. Okay, and hopefully it's not journalists as well. You know what I mean? But this is the slippery slope, right? And so, so when they blur all that together, education, criminal justice, and your health records together, and they can. And I've got there's another I tweeted also where Trump says he would use the military to distribute the vaccine. So when we were talking about using military to do all these different things, or police, or at the very least, it'll be like in China. They already have immunity passports in China. You got a yellow, you got a green, you got a red. And if you got a red, they don't necessarily come and get you, but you can't leave the house. I imagine if you do, then they will come and get you. So it'll set the precedent for being able to share all this data. And once you share all this data, well, that's basically social credit. I mean, that's if people don't know what it is, there's a if you just want to see some good optics, just to give it, because visual sense is better than me explaining it. You actually see the cameras and stuff on people, but it's basically so it's regular financial credit. I mean, they got that aspect, so regulates interest rates on loans and things like that, but it also regulates your access to transportation, education, housing, healthcare, based not just on what you spend, but what you post online. When you're walking around in public, they've got 3D facial recognition cameras, so the way you behave in public, and it pools it all together, and with big data, big data analytics. I mean, so that's basically why I use that term, because that's the most immediate thing you could call something like that you could look at and to get a sense of what it would be. And with the education, I mentioned that there's 3 technologies. So adaptive learning, the socio-emotional learning, and the precision education. So adaptive learning, as I mentioned, is the cognitive behavioral, right? Basically the thinking part. Okay, the socio-emotional is basically, that's mental health. That's mental health, and that's also biohealth. But then precision health is really biohealth, because it wants to give you personalized learning based on your IQ, and not just IQ based on some tests you did, but they want to look at your DNA and say from your DNA what your IQ propensity is. And so there, so same thing, just all merged together.
Our universe is incredible, surrounded by mystery and beauty. And many of us have questions about our past, present, and future. October Hallam is an intuitive medium with over 20 years of experience. She has assisted people with discovering their path by understanding their past and connected the living to their loved ones who have made the transition. She is currently offering readings through Skype, Zoom, FaceTime, phone, and in person. You can reach her at theancientgift222@gmail.com. Now, in the notes you sent me, you also wrote socio-emotional learning. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, socio-emotional learning, it might sound like, helping students with their self-esteem and their motivation and things like that, maybe teaching them, how to be compassionate, maybe stuff like that. And, the language in a lot of the pedagogy, fancy word for learning philosophy, is that, but that's not really what the end game is for it. So in order to, they want it to be a science, okay? So it's not like, you just like a life coach. It's not that type of thing. They want to be scientific about how they're going to motivate you and track your emotions. And so it's going to be a bunch of what they call biofeedback wearables. So people might be familiar with those, like the Fitbits. And if you haven't noticed, I've noticed, maybe it's just because it's on my radar, but I'm seeing a lot of ads and articles, which I'm sure there's a lot of people that are, having some anxiety issues and stuff like that from being locked in. And especially now you got people, I'm on the south side of Chicago. I'm not right in it, but, I drove past some smashed up stuff. Right. So, anxiety, obviously people's emotions are up right now. So what they're saying is they've got these apps for you, the Calm app and things like that will monitor your heart rate. In the education realm, it would not just, if you're an athlete, by the way, it might give you your pedometer or something and tell you when you're working out too hard and things like that. But in education, they want to look at, the Gates, let's start with the Gates Foundation. Okay. They got something called galvanic skin response monitors. Okay, and those are basically these little bracelets that measure your skin conductivity, which can correlate with, heart rhythms and things like that to demonstrate, are you paying attention? Are you motivated? Are you excited? Things like that. There's a company called Brain Code that measures your EEGs to see, like how good you're processing, how quickly you're processing information. Are you paying attention? NeuroCore does the same thing. It's another company, and that one is funded by Betsy DeVos. She's also she once sat on the board of the company. She had to jump down from the board right before she became Secretary of Ed. But that company used to do also sports stuff or help you focus if you're like a business person too. But she in the education realm wants to use it to it has ADHD treatments. Okay, and there's companies like Achille that has, they call them like digital prescriptions. They're video games that are supposed to help you focus. So they've got some built-in mechanism where somehow when you lose focus on the game, it's supposed to. And by the way, this biofeedback principle works on the same stimulus response stuff. It's just instead of the stimulus being, paper and pencil or something, and then there being some buffer between, the thinking part of the mind, or you have to observe the stimulus, think about it in order to respond. It's just literally as soon as the stimulus is hitting your neurology in a way that basically, there is no thinking. It's just going to make you have a physical response, which is supposed to help condition you better. So the premise is also in education. This is what they might put under the euphemism of education technologies not yet imagined. So people are saying, well, if you're stuck inside all day and you have a learning disability, how are you going to get help, right? If you have an individualized education program, IEP, or you have like a counselor that helps you throughout the day and things like that. Okay, tutoring. So what they're going to give you, instead of having those counselors and your IEP what they're going to have is these biofeedback wearables. Okay. And so those are, that will be the pitch for it, right? They've also got some that are used. Microsoft has some facial recognition, right? So they look at, are you happy, sad, disgusted, things like that.
And that is that is terrifying. And talk a little bit about what precision education is.
So basically, so it's it's giving you a personalized lesson. So the adaptive learning gives you a personalized lesson, right, based on how you respond to the windows. But precision education, I was going to say precision medicine, because it comes out of this thing called precision medicine, which is all about personalized DNA-based learning. Okay, with precision education, before they give you the adaptive learning software, what they would do is they would look at your DNA, and they want to look at what genes suggest you have a high or low enough IQ, and they'll say, well, hey, your IQ is only so high, so we're going to give you this software, right, instead of that software, and then that software will personalize things within this the cap they've already put on your propensity. It basically comes out of bell curve stuff. Okay, literally comes out of eugenics, right? And the order Skull and Bones is super important in the history of eugenics. Daniel Coy Gilman actually hired one of Thomas Henry Huxley's main students to basically push the eugenics stuff. So Thomas Henry Huxley was they call him Darwin's bulldog, because he basically pushed all the Darwinian stuff. Okay, and he was Francis Galton was Darwin's cousin. Okay, and Galton is the one that came up with eugenics. Darwin, if you read the subtitle of Origins of Species, it's the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Okay, and then so those two theories are largely come together in Thomas Henry Huxley, who passes it down to Julian Huxley. Becomes the president of British Eugenics Society, first Director General of United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, which talks all about eugenics. You can see UNESCO's purposes and its philosophy online. You get that PDF free anywhere. And he actually he helped write the UNESCO Constitution with Bonesman, Archibald MacLeish. He was Order of Skull and Bones, but T.H. Huxley was invited to give the inaugural address at Johns Hopkins by Daniel Coy Gilman, Bonesman Daniel Coy Gilman, and then he hired his main man. The other ways that eugenics was pushed was by the Order of Skull and Bones was basically they funded the Nazis through Union Banking Corporation. That was one of the Bushes. Prescott Bush with Knight Woolley. And one of the Harrimans, I want to say E. Rowland. I don't think it was Averill, but the mother, the Harriman mother, she set up the eugenics record office. Okay, so they got their hands all over eugenics as well. So that most people would think that element of the eugenics, they call that the race hygiene. Okay, and so that was like the Hitler's, Uberman, Superman, race stuff. But it was always a mental component to it. So, they might have sterilized you because, you're Eastern European or you were black or you were Jewish, but they also, regardless of what color you were, they would sterilize you if your IQ wasn't high enough. Okay, and so the terms like idiot, imbecile, moron, these were like clinical terms. Each one represented 10 points on the IQ scale. So way IQ scores work is 100 is the mean average. Every 10 points above means you're like a year ahead. Like if you're basically a year ahead in learning. Okay, you're a year more developed is how they work it. And so that's, if you look at the bell curve, okay, Charles Murray's bell curve, his IQ statistics are literally the same. Like when he spreads them out on, the racial spectrum, they're literally the same as what all those old school eugenicists put it on. A lot of it basically mirrors the old IQ data from like World War I, the soldiers in World War I. stuff like that. And if you just look at his citations, you don't even have to read the whole book. You can just look at his citations if you don't want to read that monster. And you can see that there's people like William Shockley, Richard Lynn, James Flynn, Felipe J. Rushton, Arthur Jensen, Linda Gottfredson. Most of these people were part of the Pioneer Fund. And I mean, some of it is rabidly racist stuff, but it's all certainly on the spectrum of eugenics. It's whether mental hygiene or race hygiene, however they wanted to put it. And there's a guy, Robert Plowman, who was cited in there, who was one of the main proponents of precision education. He wants you to have a learning chip, so some kind of device that scans your DNA and it provides you, I guess maybe it'll look at some epigenetics as well, but it's going to be a chip that keeps up with your DNA to give you your personalized lessons.
Man, that is extremely disturbing. Now, something else that this COVID era has been extremely convenient for is ushering in this new technocracy, this new virtual world, this virtual age, and this transhuman aspect to it as well. Now, where do you see this going? We've seen a push more for people to kind of just stay in this virtual world and become, I guess, more one with machines. That I see an eventuality of them wanting to kind of merge man and machine. What are your thoughts on this in our future?
Yeah, so if anybody didn't know, during all this, while all this is going on, Elon Musk announced he's going to be ready for human trials on that Neuralink this year, right? If you don't know what Neuralink is, it's what's called a brain-computer interface. We'll call it a brain chip. Most people call it a brain chip, but if you want to use the proper terminology, it's a brain-computer interface. And there's three other human-computer interface, brain-machine interface, human-machine. If you wanted to Google around, all three of those would get you research from all the places where they make that stuff, which are like Facebook. It's not just Elon Musk. Facebook's working on them. They say they want to make brain clicks for virtual reality. They've got some thought to type. I mean, this, by the way, so they've already done all kinds of studies on the monkeys where they can control robots. If you haven't seen, I mean, it's not science fiction anymore. The first brain-computer interface, the first neural implant in a human brain was in the 60s by a guy, Jose Manuel Rodriguez Delgado, who was tied to the Order of Skull and Bones. That's something that I think I dig that up. I hadn't seen it, found it anywhere. I literally looked through the name, the address, not the address book, but the names. Some of the actual address book is facsimile in there, but the name list. And there's three guys: Frank Davis, Ashburn, and I can't remember the other two. But the article is a free market future of brain-computer interfaces. If you want to look at that, if you want to look at how there's three guys that are around Delgado, okay, and then there's a guy, Eric Luthard. I think I'm saying that right. It's Leuthardt. So I might be pronouncing that. I've only read it, never heard it pronounced. But he is, and I want to say Washington University, which I believe is the one in Missouri, not in actual Washington. And he works on neural implants. And there's two bonesmen that work at that college in the medical department. So, there's others that, where the bonesmen pop up around the brain-computer interface stuff. But if you want to, like I said, that article is free market future of brain-computer interfaces. It's on several different publications. I know it's on Op-Ed News and a couple others. But one of the ways that that they're pushing that as a good thing is the same way I mentioned the biofeedback wearables is mental health or healthcare. So Well, okay, so epilepsy, paralysis, Parkinson's syndrome is one of the main things, because they've got some of these that can help you with that. So if you got like seizures, you can put this thing in here, and then it's got a little port that you swipe when you're feeling like you're gonna have a seizure, and it can balance it out. There's people that those actually work for, and they've got others that can help with the tremors if you got stuff like that. But Delgado, he wanted to use it to help with aggression and stuff like that. And in the article that I wrote, one of his reports, or was in a book he collaborated on, I think, you can see the quote there where he talked about, he wanted to quell inner city riots. I didn't think about how relevant that is right now. He wanted to quell inner city riots with these devices. So you'd have it. So while everybody is doing this right now, what he's saying is you'd have this thing, and he literally said this, and you could go zap. And I've got it's called physical control of the mind. They're behind me. You probably can't see them. I'm gonna pull it up and show you. Physical control of the mind has pictures of the monkeys with their heads open, and a human with his head bandaged, and all of that. It's in the 60s when he did that stuff. And that's what the guy was. It was my first name or last name Hannibal. I lost it. But one of his partners was his son. His son was is the order school. So anyways, but he was at Yale. By the way, he was at Yale, and when he was there, the treasurer was the order, and some other guys were around. So. So that would, they could say, hey, we'll give you that to help you with these diseases and things, or, to help people that are, lost control of their limbs. But hey, might have a port in the back that might help you calm down if you're, getting out of line. And it'll be hooked up to the Internet of Things that'll help manage your social credit score. Right. And now Musk says that he wants to give it to you because, as I mentioned with, those AI algorithms, those things, they basically are going to just let them run free, right? They're not going to go ahead and have a review board and check to make sure, it's all ethical and good before we go forward with them. Well, what this means is like this, okay? That data, all those machines, the adaptive learning, all that works by data mining. Okay, and in order to personalize, it has to do that. In order to personalize, it has to get better. It has to become more precise about measuring your different algorithms, whether they're thinking, biological, mental. Okay, and so what this means is it's helping you learn, but you're helping it learn, right? And these things are, you've seen the exponential growth of these things, right? They call it Moore's Law, right? And it's supposed to, it just keeps exponentially, right? Like on the curve, that's when it goes up to here. That's when all of it comes together, and basically you have to merge with the machine, because now it's basically, right, if the adaptive learning software reaches artificial general intelligence, and it can basically do what I can do as a teacher, and it can teach a human being better than I can, well, then that means it can think better than humans, period. That means the human being is obsolete entirely, not just the physical labor of, you got these little rovers or whatever that can bring you your drink at the restaurant for your social distancing. If you've seen any of these places in Korea where they got these robots and they're sitting in these glass pods, and these robots bring them a drink and they have to sit by themselves. And I did it. I did it. I went off the end and forgot where I was going with that, man. Oh, the AI is going to learn faster than you. And yes. So Elon Musk says he needs to he's doing it to also save you from being obsolete, right? So this stuff is going to take over. And so he's being a hero he's helping you merge with it, because if you can't beat it, join it. I think he literally says that. Yeah. And so, that's the other pitch that he's giving you.
Now, when you're looking at this, and you can see where all this is going, there's some people might say, well, the system's too big to fail. How can we fight against this? What can we do? What are the solutions? Because the system is huge. It controls everything, and it seems to just keep, consuming and getting bigger and having more control. So how can we fight against this system?
Okay, so This stuff's, I mean, the world is in such disarray right now. And it's like my 5-point plan for education seems like, you know, I mean, this just seems so small compared to everything on top of what I wrote. So the 5 points are this. Okay, so
well, you got to start somewhere, you know.
Yeah, procedurally, local control, public control. Okay, so you know, that means no privatization, no corporate charter schools, no public-private partnerships, right? Keep the public and the private separate, right? I mean, the merger of the public and private, you know, you want to call it communism, you want to call it fascism, you want to call it communitarianism, whatever you want to call it. Okay, it's not, you know, the constitutional Bill of Rights protected, you know, in a civil domain, okay, where we actually have due process, right? When you blur that together with a big tech company, and other corporations, right? What happens is, right, those supersede or at least get in the way of, right, your natural rights, your natural rights, your natural law. Okay, so local control, public control. The second is basically to abolish the psychological conditioning method, okay, of learning, okay? And it's not just, you know, I mean, that means technologically, and also, you know, remember the detentions and your gold stars? That's the same thing, right? You know, that whole concept of, you know, external gratification of learning for the purpose of, you know, workforce skills or something other than, right, and the enlightenment of knowing how to be a human being, right? And so the third part is digital student privacy. I'm not against, I mean, me and you are using a computer right now, and this, you know, this is a good thing. So I'm not against the technology. I'm not a Luddite, as they might say. But, you know, I'm sure there's ways to use this stuff without having all of our everything we do track, traced, and you know, aggregated into some giant database, you know, that you know, Bill Gates, you know, Eric Schmidt, and whoever else, you know, get to sit on top of like a throne. All right, and then the last two I think are actually the most important at this point, really. In some ways, they're like the most, you know, idealistic or philosophical or whatever, but that is basically, you know, just where we're at, I think. And so those two are basically return to a classical curriculum, and then not just, you know, what they call the trivium, okay, so grammar, logic, rhetoric, but also buttressed with or combined with what I call a metaphysics of, well, consciousness studies, okay? And that maybe sounds, you know, fancy or something. It just means study of first principles, okay? So basically, study, you know, you can go back to the ancients, you know, different cultures had different names for it. The Greeks had logos, the Chinese had the Tao, the Hindus had the Urta, the Buddhists had the Dharma, okay, Persians had Asha, you know, I mean, you can put God under this banner, and, you know, it's the idea that there are first principles and that reality is real and that truth is non-contradictory, and that from that we have this thing called the golden rule, where, right, do unto others. It might sound in some ways, you know, kind of, you know, overly simplified, but, you know, if you look around at what's going on right now, right, legitimate anger is getting turned against people that didn't do anything, and in people in your own communities sometimes, right? That's, you know, I mean, like, if we had some more golden rule here, you know what I mean? Like, you know, all that other stuff is, I think, secondary. I think if we had, you know, if we still had some of those first principles, maybe, you know, first of all, we wouldn't have let the technology get this far, and second of all, you know, we'd be able to, you know, handle ourselves a little bit better. So, you know, if I can just break down the trivium, you know, just to kind of give you a sense of how the trivium works with study of first principles and truth. Grammar, you know, you might think of it as, you know, like sentence structure and stuff like that. And that's what they call special grammar. Okay, every language has its own special grammar. right? So, English has its own alphabet and its own sounds, and then, Latin has its own, Hangul has its own alphabet and its own phonetics, okay? But every language basically has the same general grammar when it's studying a topic. So the general grammar is basically like your vocabulary, right? It's the words we give to name the categories of reality and the categories of the mind. All right, when the categories of the mind and the categories of reality coincide, non-contradictory, this is called truth. Okay, when we express it without contradiction, this is called rhetoric. Rhetoric is not only used to express truth without contradiction, without fallacy, but it's also used to weed out the errors in our own thinking. So when you're thinking, as George Orwell said, thinking involves language fundamentally. And so, you dialogue with yourself, and then you say, and you kind of weigh out your ideas, and you go, okay, wait, well, if I got these two ideas, they don't work together, how do I make them work together? Or do they work together? All right, but it's also to be able to do that with the words of others, right? The fallacies and the propaganda of corporations and governments. Okay, be able to look at the contradictions, maybe in some of the some of the models that they want to tell you to stay home based on, right? And there's actually, you don't have to be a scientist to look at what they say and look at the actual numbers on the CDC. All you gotta do is look at the two, put them on the screen next to each other and see that they're different, right? And so that there's some questions to be asked at the very least. Okay, but and I'll say that the reason why this should have the metaphysics under it is because we're not taught any of that anymore, right? We're taught this basically relativist stuff, right? This what they in the language arts they call it, well, sometimes they call it deconstructionism. Right, and it's basically that, right, that words don't have meaning, that the categories of the mind and the categories of reality do not have to coincide, that truth can be somehow contradictory, and this is largely where we're at, I think, with morality, right? So morality and ethics requires what they call a priori thinking. Okay, and so again, this has to do with first principles. So the root is prior. It means that knowledge comes prior to observation or measurement. And this is why morality works that way. So like the Bill of Rights, right? Chris, I don't have to observe you or measure you in any kind of way to know prior to observing you or measuring you that you have all, right, the natural rights of a human being, right? Freedom of expression, right to defend yourself, all that stuff. Okay, I don't have to measure. Okay, a posteriori, which is basically the scientific method, right, means that knowledge comes after measurement. Now, there's a lot you can do with that. Okay, but it should never override or supersede those first principles of natural law and human rights. And then, if you got time now, maybe we can go ahead and talk about that Nuremberg Code as far as human rights, right? Because that has to do with informed consent, on the principle that, right, you have the right to decide what goes in your body, right? This is a priori. But at this point, right, if they're going to say that you got to get the vaccine, well, it's because the model says, it's because the measurement says. Well, the measurement might be way more sophisticated than I can, me or you can do with our, math. I'm not a math person. But, the simplest way to put this is that, the measurement is never the full sample. Right? You can't measure the future to know how the virus is going to react. How are people going to hunker down themselves? Right. So we already saw how their measurements went from 2 million down to 200,000. So what happens is when anybody tries to tell you that their measurements supersede your a priori rights, what they're telling you is basically that they're the authority. And this is what happens when you have moral relativism. Right? When you have moral relativism, right, and total skepticism. What it means is that basically, if there's no truth in reality, if there's no objective reality, if contradictions don't matter, then the people that are going to make decisions are going to be the people that have the most power, basically. right? And they can do it under the guise of being nice, because there is no, they can contradict themselves. They can be authoritarians and tell you that they're the heroes, because there is no truth is contradictory to them. And if you weed that out of the thinking of human beings, regardless of what their jobs are, where they go to school, what kind of technology they got, who's the politician, what's the company, right? It's game over. And conversely, if it's the other way around, it's game over for them. And I'll just end with this. I saw a lot of bad stuff, looking at what's been going on with all the rioting and stuff, but I also saw a lot of people helping each other across lines. I saw black people helping cops. I saw in the little village, people were saying that I don't know, I didn't confirm myself, but they were some of the gangs out there were helping the cops. I mean, there was clearly people with bats helping the cops. Were they gang members? I don't know, but that's what they said. So, you know what I mean? People who were supposed to fight didn't. And as much as there was provocateurs and people out there, trying to demonize the legitimate protest, I saw citizens protecting the businesses, and so, I think I saw a lot of truth. Okay. I saw a lot of golden rule out there. So I believe that evil can, good is always the first. The good is always the first. Evil is an inversion of that, and so it can only get so far until it just collapses, like Anthony Sutton said. It'll eventually collapse under its own weight, and the little mustard seeds of decent people will come back eventually. I have to believe it.
Well, that's well said, and something else that makes me hopeful about everything is I see more and more people every day waking up to some of the corruption and things going on behind the scenes, and it's on a mass scale right now. It's really quite fascinating to see it occur. But John, thank you so much for coming on. That was awesome information. If people want to find out more about your book, about your work, where can they go?
So you go to schoolworldorder.info is my website. And I'm going to try to make I'm so slow at this tech stuff. I'm going to make like a little email list. So, if you want to get on that, and then anytime I write something or do one of these, you can get that. But if you just follow my Twitter, it's Taoist Professor at Professor Taoist. I pretty much I post everything up there. It's a little research page kind of thing. So those are the two ways to keep up with my stuff and keep in contact with me.
Right, very good. John, thank you again for coming on. There's a lot more we could talk about, so I'll have to have you back on in the future.
Sounds good, man.
All right.
Come back.
All right, you have an excellent rest of your night.